my CEO at the time really challenged me that, hey, you're doing a great job of tracking what's going on. You're doing a great job of telling us where the issues might be. Now I want you to start to concentrate on how do you fix those issues? How do you take that knowledge and ideas on what you would do and be the one to actually go fix those things? And that was the hybrid nature of the COO CFO thing.
Bill Johnson is with us today. He is the CFO and COO of Airspace Link, a company helping cities and organizations safely integrate drones into the national airspace through cloud-based geospatial infrastructure and software.
You go from being a doer to being a leader, having difficult conversations. The not necessarily that you have to like it, but that you have a comfort level with having these difficult conversations. They're not easy. Not everybody's going to like it, but drawing them out of people will appreciate that you went through the process.
Finish the sentence for me. A leader under pressure should always... Welcome to the Growth Under Pressure podcast, sponsored by Adapt CFO. I'm your host, Eric Josovitz. Bill Johnson is with us today. He is the CFO and COO of Airspace Link, a company helping cities and organizations safely integrate drones into the national airspace through cloud-based geospatial infrastructure and software. Bill, great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to have the conversation today.
Absolutely. Bill, I've been looking forward to having this conversation. Tell us more about your backstory, how you got into finance operations, and now the drone and airspace world.
Absolutely. So born and raised in the Midwest, lived in the Midwest for the vast majority of my life, except for a couple stints. Came from Flint, Michigan, home of Buick City, lots of sports athletes. And my father and my mother were both big into sports. Everyone in my family, with the exception of my mother, played a college sport. And that's really only because college sports weren't available when my mom was doing it. But she played a lot of volleyball and everything as well. Lots of coaching in it. My father coached football for 25 plus years. And, that sports has had a profound influence on my life, not just, something to do, but also how you learn all of your life lessons, teamwork and work ethic and ups and downs, dealing with disappointment. But as I got into school, I chose my college based on where I could go play basketball more so than the academic portion of that. And as such, I don't know that I necessarily thought I was going to get into, finance as a role. I always loved the operations. I had grown up working at a marina up north in Sheboygan, Michigan, as my summer job. And I really loved being on the water, loved being at a place where you're kind of serving people that are there to have a good time. And so as I went through school, came out and I didn't feel like I had an education that was very practical. It was a little more theoretical. It definitely helped you own your mental skills. So as I went into my MBA program right on the heels of that, so that I could continue being around basketball on graduate studies and whatnot, got mine in finance and strategy and, started looking for a job. I ended up finding a job down in Columbus, Ohio at a CFO group that really took a lot of high-tech growth businesses from the university and tried to put the business structure around them. And that was really the advent of learning about how to run a small business, how to run a business that's growing really fast, and how I could help entrepreneurs. And that was my real love of it, that finance was a tool for me to be able to help these entrepreneurs and get to a decision-making capacity with them, or at least an influential capacity with them very early on in my career, because it was something where, finance wasn't always the sexiest thing. It wasn't always what my friends were trying to get into. But that CFO group provided all of that structure. I got to meet a lot of interesting companies, but I learned all of the structure and the ideas and the concepts around how you help enable an entrepreneur to realize their dreams. Did that for a couple years before I moved back to Michigan for a job that was actually coincidentally with someone who I did my capstone project with at my MBA program. And he gave me an opportunity to be the number 2 at his organization pretty quickly and early on in my career. Not a huge organization, but a set of companies, which really well aligned with, hey, I'd been at a CFO group where I'd had multiple clients that I had to talk to at any given point. You had to be adaptable and versatile to be able to handle, a software company, a hard tech company, a life sciences company, and, become really well-rounded in all of those disciplines. From there, it really got me into, after after an event that happened that we might touch on a little bit later. It really got me into the tech space. And, since that time, for the past 15 or 17 years of my life, I've been involved in this tech space, and whether that's directly software, tech enabled services, and a lot in this hybrid COO CFO role. CFO is kind of at the core of it. Everything centers around the measurement of the organization. How do you enable all of the other pieces? The right hand knows what the left hand's doing. But you really start off from this financial structure in place, understand the implications, scenario generation. But then it was at my second place of that I was the CFO, called Extend Group. And it was there that my CEO at the time really challenged me that, hey, you're doing a great job of tracking what's going on. You're doing a great job of telling us where the issues might be. Now I want you to start to concentrate on how do you fix those issues? How do you take that knowledge and ideas on what you would do and be the one to actually go fix those things? And that was the hybrid nature of the COO CFO thing. That at these smaller companies where you need both roles, but they might not be as built out yet. You would need someone that can kind of handle both sides of that. And when they're the same person, at certain stages of the business, that's very advantageous because you can kind of solve both of those issues at the same time with the same voice. At some points in these small companies and growth companies, it's really about hearing a uniform voice across the organization so that everybody understands and has confidence in what you're doing.
That's a very interesting perspective on that. And we've had a guest on recently that she's working for or was working for a global payments company, and she was their CFO and then became their COO. And understanding the financial implications of the operational aspects, I think, is super important as well. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What's the day-to-day of having a financial know-how and in operations? Like, are you really being stretched super thin because you're managing two roles, or is it more of just, hey, I'm able to lead both teams and be more in the clouds higher up and delegate and lead two different teams or two different managers of those teams, and it works efficiently?
Yeah, context is probably one of the most important pieces, and the role evolves. SkySpecs, the company I was at prior to Airspace Link, is a great example of that. I came in, pretty early on in the journey, right on the heels of my firstborn son, and jumped into this role where they didn't have a lot of structure or anything in place. And I think I was employee, somewhere between 15 and 20 there. And initially for the first 3 months was just establishing a structure, right? You want to put the right financial structure in place. You want to put the right forecast in place because you're helping them raise money right at that beginning, right? We were right in the middle of the series, just after the seed series, and starting on that next series. And it was a really interesting dynamic there because they were getting a lot of business relatively quickly. So you start off putting this great financial structure in place, but then you have to move right over to operational enablement. And you're helping people that are subject matter experts, in that case, in renewable wind energy, drone enabled tech, and then data flowing through. But for me, it was establishing very early on a cadence for how data flows throughout the organization, and people are given context on how their role is different from the time that they're marketing a relatively new technology to how they're selling and how you're enabling the sales team, right? Like you're helping them with price negotiations, a lot of time spent on actual, sales contract negotiations, right into the delivery of that and how you're building the customer success team and the operations project management team, all the way through to the final delivery of that data, analysis of that data, and then the upsell renewal types of components of that. But when you have that context of what it means at each and every level, and you can display that through each and every level, it's really powerful because you start to build it in a uniform manner that everybody understands. So for me, I started off at the ground level at that company, building a lot of those tools, right? I built the CRM tool, I built the financial structure, I helped with the operational tools. And when they're all tied together, that's where the magic happens. But then you're actually able to hand something to someone that says, hey, I have the trunk of the tree built. I have a foundation for you to get started at. And you're not asking someone to come in to a new, relatively immature industry that has a lot of ambiguity to it. You're giving them a little bit of a foundation for them to stand on. And then, as you meet with them more, you're able to help that context continue throughout the organization. So for me, I started off at that place very much a doer, very much in the weeds of almost everything that was going on. And then, you go out and you hire an analyst, you go out and hire a controller, you have a VP of operations, you have a sales leader. And now all of those people are operating on a platform, an ERP system almost that you constructed, and the ins and outs of all those data pieces, and you can help all of them out. You go from being a doer to being a leader and almost someone that's helping them with their problems, more of it, like, that psychologist effort of what's going on. And then finally, you can concentrate on the fun part, which is, solving new problems. Because I think that, even for me, it's building the structure is great. I love doing that the first time, but maintaining the structure can get a little monotonous. But once you're able to build that the right way, then you get to go tackle the next problem, and you get to use financial data to show where's the bottleneck of the organization, where is the inefficiencies, and you get to solve those one after another, depending on the priority that you put on each of them.
Yeah, I think you have to be a problem solver in that role. And from what I've seen from others in similar roles in the CFO, COO seat, you have to be a problem solver and a storyteller. You have to be able to tell a good story and portray that across the organization. I think you have me sold. I feel like now at this point, any CFO should also be in that COO seat. And I've seen it many times, especially in the startup world when you're, wearing multiple hats. I think it's integral. But
I think there's a point where you outgrow it, to be honest. And we talked about this several times. Even at SkySpecs, there was a time where, closer to the end of my tenure, before I moved over to Airspace, like, we were talking about separating the role, and that was the right decision. You'd gotten to the point where the organization had hit that size and gotten the validation in the marketplace to separate those roles, and it was needed. But early on in some of those times, it can be very beneficial to be able to have that skill set to be able to do both.
do you think I mean, every industry is different. I think the answer to this question is probably no, but do you think there's a point in time when that, like, you can start to tell that you need to split the roles in two?
For us at SkySpecs, it came when we were starting to do acquisitions. We were starting to bring on more, and we'll see both, and integrating the operations while integrating the financials of multiple organizations that were very disparate and might have different cultures, was when that role, we started first talking about that role. And, I still continued on in that role through the end of my tenure there, but you could start to see where it needed to be. We were already grooming someone to be, that COO on the heels of that. And, that's who took over on the COO side when I left. But there was definitely a time, and for us, it was at that M&A point. I think anytime that you're getting to a point where you're adding additional complexity within the organization, as long as you have that great foundation to be built, and that was a foundation that could scale, then it makes sense to be able to do both at the same time. But, there comes a time where there's just too much work for one person to be able to do, and you can hide it for a long time if you have the right lieutenants, but probably not forever.
Nowadays you're seeing a lot of internal folks get hired into leadership roles. And I think it reminds me of the restaurant industry and managers and how they've been a dishwasher and a cook and front of the house, back of the house, working with other locations. And ultimately, that leads to, server, you name it, and that leads to them becoming a manager. Then, understanding every person's role, the psychology of it, like you mentioned, they feel that what they're going through. And at the same time, they can then check off inventory, run through the financial aspect of it, and understand it a bit more.
I think I think that from an operational and financial standpoint, having the context of that organization is imperative, right? There's always been the bugaboo, can you promote your greatest salesperson to a sales manager? First of all, you lose the
The revenue.
potential revenue from that best salesperson, but you're also wondering if they're going to be the right sales manager because their skill set doesn't necessarily translate. However, when you get someone that kind of builds from the bottom up, they have enough context, they have enough experience that it really helps that. And that's what you see with a lot of the larger companies that now have these programs where they're trying to get managerial rotations where people get a lot of context. My niece just came out of the Indiana University, and got into a large company that has this great rotational training program for, and she's learning so much, and you can see why, because she's going to have that context to be a great leader within that organization at some point in time in the future.
Yeah, that rotational right after college experience is really interesting. If you're on like a 2-year stint and every 6 months or so, or 3 to 6 months, you're switching. So you get like 4 different opportunities or roles within that period. That's super interesting, and congrats to her. You mentioned sports in the early days and leadership and teamwork, which I think are super important in leadership roles and just being not just leadership, just in a business, working in an organization, knowing how to be a team player, not being selfish. And of course, when we're talking sports, team sports specifically are very important in that sense. Tell us more about what shaped the way you lead early on. Was there a person, a lesson, or an experience that still shows up in how you operate today?
It's a funny thing, right? Like, I talk about sports and almost everything. It was such a huge part of my life, my wife's life. We both played college basketball, but it really started early on. My father was a high school football coach, and that was the first thing I ever knew. I mean, I was on the sidelines with him starting at 3 years old. I was sitting in the locker room with him. It's one of those memories that I can't go into a football locker room and not get transported back to the time where, I'm looking up at these giants of men that were only 18 years old. And, watching my dad run a room like that, watching my dad understand the different personalities. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and my dad was putting a lot of players out of the Flint area, a great sports town, into major universities. And he understood how to motivate individual people. I'll never forget one of my best friends. He was helping out. This was after his coaching days, but he was helping out my eighth grade basketball team. And there's a kid on our team that was a little bit bigger guy, right? He was huge for his size, but still not as coordinated as he would later become. And my dad was a big guy, right? 6'2", 230 or something like that in eighth grade. That's what this kid was. He was just huge. And my dad really took him under his wing, and he was like, that's my project. That's the guy that I'm going to make successful. That kid ended up playing basketball, or I'm sorry, football at Stanford University later on. And I would tell you that he would say there's a lot of the footwork and things that he learned and the confidence that my dad built in him to be able to do that. And it's funny because I look at my dad as, this guy that was able to get a lot out of those people. And, I think that shaped almost everything that I do a lot about. My dad was big, and what he preached a lot was having difficult conversations. The not necessarily that you have to like it, but that you have a comfort level with having these difficult conversations. They're not easy. Not everybody's going to like it, but drawing them out of people will appreciate that you went through the process. They will appreciate that you're trying to help them by having this difficult conversation, getting it out there. And I think that that's what's helped me is when I'm having a problem. If I don't talk about it, it kind of gnaws at you, right? Like you feel like there's not an action to be taken. But as soon as you talk about it, you found a path of action. You found a comfort level with the ambiguity that you might be in. And then you're able to transform that into some sort of action or at least understanding that is going to make you feel better about the context of it. But that sports thing is what's shaped throughout my life. And even now, as I think about it, having kids that are 8, 6, and 4, my oldest son, he's starting to go on that sports journey. Me and my wife are very excited for him to go on that sports journey, playing baseball and basketball. And, I have to remember all the time how I grew up and how great that was growing up. Like, I think I have one of the best childhoods you could ever imagine. And I want to create that same thing for my son having it. And I said this to my wife over the weekend. I don't know that there's other ways that I could teach my son life's lessons if sports weren't involved. That's just the what I always learned, and it was the best teacher that I had for it. So luckily he's into it. Luckily I'm not having to push him towards it. He naturally gravitates toward it. He's got some gifts towards it, and I hope that I can teach him the same lessons that I learned from my father and the rest of my family, my mother, brother, and sister.
I loved what you said about gaining comfort in ambiguity because that happens so often in business where there's something bad that happened or something negative. And maybe bad is the wrong term. And you have to speak to your peers or your client or your bosses about it. And it's really hard sometimes to get up there and have that conversation. But when you do, typically it goes one way or another. Yes, if it was your fault, you need to find a resolution. And depending on who the person you're talking to is, it could be it could be a rough conversation. But
Yep.
most times there's a human element. Look, you can explain what happened and have a resolution for it. You can resolve it. There's a girl, it's a college, it's actually women's like March Madness. I don't know if you saw this. The coach was yelling at her because she was not playing well, and then they showed the conversation what it sounded like. And if you watched how she was playing, it was horrible. She was missing layups. missing free throws, not defending properly. She was kind of all over the place, and the coach grabbed her. I know you've had these conversations in the past, screaming at her face, "You gotta want it. I want it for you, but it's not my story. You have to want it." And I swear, something switched in her head. She gets on the court, starts making layups, hitting, defending properly, getting steals. And that's like what we're talking about here is the conversations and the leadership to say, look, I got your back, or I'm a part of your team. I'm maybe your coach, your teammate. You can lean on me, but you need to get that willpower, and it needs to come from somewhere. I'm forcing it into you.
Tom Izzo is probably the greatest example of that. He's the coach of the
Yeah.
Michigan State Spartans, and he's still a little bit old school, but he gets the most out of every single person that he wants. And it's one of the main things that as a coach, as a parent, you want to teach your kids about grit, right? Like the ability to overcome adverse situations. And I don't know that there's anywhere that that's more applicable than sports, but you translate it to the business side, that's startup life, right? I mean, that is the way that you have to deal with the ups and downs, the roller coasters day to day. And, my wife will tell you that I live on that roller coaster. I'll be upset one second, the next day I'm riding on cloud nine. And you're saying according to that, and you have to be comfortable with that. And that's why startup life's not for everybody. Sure, it seems glamorous. You get all the money and, you have a potential lottery ticket with some of the deals, but you're going down into the depths sometimes where, everything looks, ultimately bleak, and you have to be comfortable with that too and have the resolve inside of you that I'm not going to let that get under me. I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to come back and do it. And, I think that that's for me. I needed an outlet for that feeling that I had that my family, my upbringing cultivated in me. And for me, that came to helping these small businesses and these entrepreneurs do it. Like, those entrepreneurs have a sense inside of them that they persevere through a lot, right? And, while I might not have the same risk tolerance that they do based on what I do, right? My job is to be a little more conservative, to kind of keep things on a tighter rail. But it's great to be around those people. I like that. That's the exciting part of life. You have to be comfortable with this. And, that's a lot of the hiring process when you're hiring inside of these growth oriented businesses. You look for people that have that resolve. You look for them that maybe have played team sports. It's funny, my harbor master at my summer job, who, I knew he was the president of the touchdown club, which is the fundraiser for the football team. He hired kids from high school on that summer job that came from team sports, and that was his team. So, I got to work alongside some of my friends at that summer job. Widely were lauded by the people that came into that marina as people that cared about those people that were coming in, were diligent about getting our stuff in. And he was hiring people that were just athletes. He was like, it's the safest bet that I have is that someone that's gone through all of those sports oriented endeavors, has that teamwork effort, has that sense of, I'm going to accomplish this not because I was asked to do it by a boss, but because I want to do it for me. I feel a sense of well-being and accomplishment when I get something done.
Yeah, grit and teamwork are a huge part of that. But I think one of the big ones that we think of when it comes to, having employees, recruiting is, and retaining employees is loyalty and reliability. Because if you think of football, basketball, I played college football myself. And when you think of being out there on the field, whether you're on defense or offense, you rely on that person next to you, knowing that they're going to show up, that they're going to do what they have to do. They are going to cover their area, their person. It's like, great example is as a receiver running a route, right? I know, like, if you have one person running a post, the other person's running a corner, you have to make sure that this person's going 10 yards, this person's going 8 yards,
Yep.
and that every time the rub is going to be right here. I'm going over top, you're coming underneath. And I think it's harder to understand that responsibility, that individual responsibility, and knowing I can rely on that person, not have to think about them while they're out there taking care of their role. And it is harder when you don't have that team
And you're
experience.
doing it the same way, regardless of whether you're getting the ball or not, right? You still have to run that route the same way. You still have to have the same discipline, no matter whether you're getting the ball or not. Like, and that's a tough thing for a lot of people to learn, that diligence, because you're right. Football is probably the best example of it, right? That one person can mess up a play for the entire team if they're not all doing the right thing. But that precision and that ability to do your job, control the controllable, I'm sure is something in almost every coach has talked about, right?
Mhm.
You might not be able to control everything, but we are going to control what's controllable.
Run plays are a great example of that because you got a quarterback that hands the ball to someone else. Is like, hey, you take this. Like, I'm not even going to get to, reaping the benefit myself. I'm handing this off to someone else. And then you have 9 other players that are just blocking. So really, it's one person and 10 other one person that gets the ball to go score a touchdown and 10 other people that are just blocking. They're just support staff. So
Hasn't it been great the last couple of years when you watch professional or even college football games that when that running back gets in the end zone, a lot of times now the first person he's going over to is one of those offensive
yeah.
or the entire team of offensive linemen, and it's showing an understanding of how he got there, showing appreciation for the entire team that got it. That's been a pretty cool dynamic. It's not always a touchdown dance anymore. Sometimes now it's about that guy that got in the end zone, and now he wants to go celebrate with his team because he knows that it was part of them that got him there.
I mean, it's like 80%, if not more, the offensive line. Like,
Yeah.
they're the ones opening up the running lane, the ability to not be touched by anyone.
Well, I'll tell you as a diva wide receiver myself, we always want the ball. We always want this highlight, but it shows a good understanding that we can at least sit here and talk and acknowledge all of the other people that it takes to get there.
Yep. Or standing in the end zone wide open and someone else gets the ball with, they score, but you have to say, "Hey, you were open. We were both open, but I'm glad you scored."
Yep.
It's not about me, it's about the team. If the team wins, we win. And I actually tell this to my kids. My daughter will be like, "Oh, I did a great job though." Like, Eleanor, like, I'm getting mad at like one of the other kids for not doing something correct. And I'm like, "Well, you got to do this. You got to," and then my oldest daughter is like, "But I did a great job." And it's like, but you didn't, because if the team's not on point, then we all are affected by it.
And at the same time, you want to go back to them, even if the team won, but you didn't see them give their best effort. You got to say, you still have to have that team or that individual effort that is going to bring it because your team, maybe they didn't need that today, but they will need it the next time, for you guys to reach your potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in a really similar spot in life with 3 kids, um, in very close in age. You got a 4, 6, and an 8-year-old?
Correct. Boy,
Eh,
girl, boy.
yep, boy, girl, boy. Tell us more about what life looks like for you now these days, balancing business, CFO, COOC at Airspace, scaling the business, and having some kind of work-life balance, or, whatever works for you guys.
So this past weekend was one of the greatest weekends of the year for every year for us. It's my wife's birthday. It's the March Madness, beginning of the March Madness initial weekend, and it always falls on this, right? It's just the greatest weekend. And my wife, because she played college basketball, all she wants to do is watch games. So I'm a very, very lucky man that she wants to do exactly what I want to do. Last week, we went out, and as we started talking a little bit more about this, we made the joke that it feels like all we do is work and parent. My wife's an architect, does a lot of strategy and development for them. So she's very busy as well. We were talking about it. That feels like all we do is work and parent, and then we get this kind of one weekend off to go celebrate the birthday and do this thing that we've always done, this tradition. And it was very magical for us to have. But at the end of the weekend, we still couldn't wait to get back and kind of be back with the kids. But I love what I do for a living. Right, there are very few things that I would say I'd rather be doing with my time. That I get to go help entrepreneurs achieve their dreams on this side, and then I get to go back and shape kids through their childhood in the terms of parenting. And, I had a great childhood myself. I had a great set of role models in my parents and my grandparents to be able to do it. And I thoroughly enjoy. I get to go home and I get to, whether it be wrestle with the kids or we're out playing sports. My son's got baseball or basketball. My daughter's got gymnastics. My youngest has got baseball and Ninja Warrior to get them prepared. These are, and that's the vast majority of the things we do. We still get a chance every once in a while to do individual things, but your life revolves around it, and they're the things that bring you joy. even the times where you're, a little bit down in the dumps that maybe you didn't get something to happen at work, you understand that it's part of the process and makes you work a little bit harder. And those are the things that make it sweeter, right? And, same thing with sports, right? It takes you going through a couple losses sometimes and it makes the winning of it that much sweeter. And I think that that's kind of the role that we see ourselves in. I'm sure you feel the same way about, raising the kids. The days can be long, but the years are short. And, this is the prime time to get to spend as much time doing something that you saw your parents do it and bring them a great deal of joy as well.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, on this podcast about the balance or the lack of balance. And I think I come home at 6 p.m. every single night, and that just means walking up the stairs because I'm in my basement. This is my home office. And spending that 2 hours with them every night is super important. And yeah, we sometimes can get back to work later or start earlier, but you don't want to miss those moments. It's super important. Now, my son, speaking of Ninja Warrior, he does jujitsu, so I got to get him in a team sport. He's been doing it for about 2 years, which is great for him. But we're not at the running everywhere yet. The girls do gymnastics, but I want to talk a little bit more about Airspace Link specifically because I don't think a lot of people know exactly what it is that you're building. So why don't you give us just a high level overview of what Airspace is and what you guys are working on right now?
The way we kind of liken it and start off is Ford built the automobile back in the early 1900s. And, it was a really cool thing. It was very novel, but it didn't gain widespread fame initially. But when Eisenhower built the freeway system, all of a sudden cars were everywhere. And you needed to increase the amount of infrastructure needed for those cars to operate on, right? That meant highways, traffic lights, stop signals, all of the rules of the road, so to speak. We are trying to enable that same thing for drones. And, to this point, there have not been the regulations that have kept up with the technology in terms of drones, but we're getting closer and closer to that point. The technology is very widespread, it's very good, and now we're starting to concentrate a little bit more on the security and the infrastructure of that. And for us, that means several different pieces. It means traffic control, like how do we understand who's flying what, when, and where? Because there are no roads, there are no stoplights up in the sky. How do we make sure that they are oriented towards flying in the right spot? How do we know that they're optimized for flying through the right areas, right? We don't want them flying over schools or prisons or large events. How do they understand where people can fly and where they can't fly? And what we call it is, we start off with like security, which is, put the pieces in place that governments understand what's happening in their airspace, what's unique about their airspace, and make sure it's secure. Are the people flying right and are they the right people flying in that area? And then on top of that, you layer on structure, internal operations. How do we enable that? And we call that our drone operations management system. So think of it like almost like ITSM for drones. How do you take all the disparate partners, data, equipment, software that needs to plug in to make this entire system work? That's the drone operations management system. So we have security, we have structure, and then finally it's scale. That's UTM, UAS traffic management. And that's how you start to ingratiate commercial operations, think Amazon and delivery, Walmart delivery, into that same airspace, utilizing a lot of that same infrastructure that you put into place in security and structure. And now you have this ecosystem, this harmonization of everybody flying at the same time. And that means public safety and fire and building inspectors and media drones and commercial operations are all working together in the airspace at one time. And that's our goal, the harmonization of everyone in airspace at scale. And we're getting closer and closer to that becoming a reality right now.
That's so cool. So you guys are building the highway for drones.
Highways in the sky for drones is that's how we try to boil it down to the easiest common denominator, and it's being accelerated right now based on things that are happening in the world, like how drones are being used over in places like Ukraine and in the Middle East, but also here domestically, we're about to host the FIFA games here in the United States, and the federal government has put $250 million to those FIFA cities to enable them to be drone ready, to protect from any type of drone
Tech.
missions that are happening during that time, but also make it cohesive for media drones to be able to capture all of this action in the right way. And on the heels of that, there's a lot happening with the military about how drones are being used. But there's also a lot, Amazon and Walmart are expanding at an incredible rate. Ziplines taking the operations that they've been doing all over the world and starting to bring those to the United States at a very fast pace. So it's coming soon. The regulation that should define the diaspora of drones is coming on the heels. It's called Part 108. Think of it as enabling beyond visual line of sight operations, meaning like right now you have to have someone be able to see that drone in most cases, unless you get a waiver from the government. But it's beyond visual line of sight operations and autonomous advanced operations. Think one person sitting behind a computer like this, operating 20 autonomous drone operations from across the world. Once those regulations are put into place and they're uniform so that everybody can follow the same ones, that's when you're going to see this world really take off. And it's probably going to be in the next 12 to 18 months that you're going to start seeing drones at scale in the United States.
That's wild. It's amazing how we're going from drones and AI and quantum and all these new things happening in a very short period of time all at once. But
Yeah.
it's obviously years of workings. Is in the sky, are we gonna have any floating objects, similar to, like, are we gonna have traffic lights in the sky, or is it gonna be all invisible digital type?
It's all gonna be something that is handled digitally by software through it, right? The interesting thing, right, if you think about traditional aviation, there's one traffic controller that kind of rules it all, right? That's Raytheon in the United States. There's a couple other major players around the world. But in UAS, because it is more localized to where those flights are gonna happen, and there's so many more obstacles and potentially density at
Mhm.
below 400 feet, you're going to have to get really, really good at how all of these different players interact. So instead of having one traffic controller, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that have traffic control systems. Our goal is to be the UTM for government. But, Google Wing and Amazon and Zipline all have their own UTMs. We'll have to see how do we peer-to-peer network. But it's the underpinnings of how you'd handle airspace. Because, right, you're going to have UAS that's coming fast and furious. They're talking about air traffic control modernization at the FAA level. You're talking about low altitude satellites in order to, handle, internet and connectivity. Eventually, we're also talking about advanced aerial mobility where air taxis are part of the mix, which will be in between UAS and traditional aviation. And pretty soon, it's not going to be about how you have disparate parts of the sky. It's going to be how you have one cohesive airspace. And, we believe that what we're building could be the underpinnings for how you handle it at each different level, because we're tackling what would potentially be the most dense airspace because buildings are still a part of it during that time.
Right. So in theory, we'll have drones, air taxis, planes, helicopters, maybe helicopters below, right?
Yeah.
But maybe near air taxis. Are we going to be able to have our own cars and be able to, like, is that, like, from your perspective, is that coming at any point in time soon?
Probably at some point. I can't give you a timeline on how quickly those things will be able to. But to your point, I mean, we're watching revolutions happen so fast. I mean, that what I mentioned about Ford and highways. I mean, that was something where at that point in time in the world, you almost had to do them sequentially to be able to prove it out.
Yeah.
We're doing the technology advancement for drones and building the infrastructure all at the same time. And why can't we do this faster? So I think once you get some of this infrastructure and the regulations in place, I think you're going to see the investment that we've seen in AI be mirrored by the investment that you're going to see in drones and advanced air mobility over the course of the next 10, 12 years. Could we see it in our lifetime? I'm going to guess that yes. If I was a betting man, I'd say it. It's funny. One of the things that we implemented here at Airspace Link, because that regulation was kind of far off, we had in our team what we called future memories. And what we were trying to do is tell a story about how the world's going to look different in 5, 10, 15 years. My story was I want to be able to go tell my son when he goes off to college and just got, a few things delivered to his dorm room for whatever university. That was done because his dad got to work on building the airspace. And I thought that that was just a really cool story about, you don't do all these startups because, they're always going to pay off, right? But you do it because you believe in that specific topic or you're doing something that could potentially be world changing. And, that's one of the funnest parts about at least the last two stops I've been at SkySpecs and Airspace Link.
I feel every successful entrepreneur comes with a heartfelt driven mission, something that's going to be impacting it. And people will say what they will about Elon Musk and that he's selfish and trillion-dollar compensation, whatever it is. But the guy's building for us. He's building all these things for us. And I don't know enough about him to speak on that, but I feel like when I see what he's been able to accomplish, it's only at the sacrifice of his health and all the other things. People don't know that, the day in, day out that it comes with.
I think that's the difference too for the role that I play, right? I love running a business and I'm good at making things more efficient or seeing things that could be improved upon. But the real leaps forward that we're seeing in the world right now are based on people very dissimilar from me, right? They're based on people that have a huge vision. They're based on people that are willing to take these enormous risks. They're pushing the envelope on something different than the world has seen before. And those people are absolutely necessary. Whether or not you care for some of the eccentricities that Musk might exhibit, he's pushing the world forward and pushing it forward fast. And, that's an exciting time to live in that you see things moving that fast.
Absolutely. Well, you gave me a little taste of some growth under pressure moments that you went through. Tell us about a time or two in your career when you were really under pressure, things were looking dark and gloomy. You weren't sure how they would turn out. Tell us what happened and, what you took away from it.
Yeah. I got two that really jumped to mind. One of them was pretty early on in my career. I had kind of alluded to the fact that I got to move back to Michigan with a gentleman that I had done my undergrad research with, or I'm sorry, my postgrad research with. And he put me in charge of two companies. They were selling healthy frozen beverages as a distributor, wanted to move into like a franchise type of space. And he was basically like, I know you've been working in financial, but I want you to become my, I think he said director of organizational development, but basically the equivalent of like a COO operations. And I got to move into that role. And over the course of a year, we had a great deal of success. We grew up 5, 6x revenues during that time. And it was a really, really pivotal time in that company. During that time, we had found out that the person that was in charge of the financials, he wasn't built for the growth that was happening, right? Really good guy, but just wasn't built for the growth that was happening. And so I ended up taking over a lot of the financials. And at one point, coming on the heels of this, I'm like, yeah, I can help you with the other three companies. I don't know much about them. I don't know what's going on, but I can at least help you with the financial aspect of it while I'm still doing this over here. About a week after I took it over, I was sitting at my computer and working through, some structure and some revamp of, what, the financials for those companies. And all of a sudden the door burst open and it's a SWAT agent with a gun pointed at me and says, hands off the keyboard. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Come to find out there had been they had gotten, been selling something, but had not been going about it in the right manner for this medical billing company. That was the other one. And it affected, obviously the way that they did. They came in with the SWAT team. All companies got put under a receiver from a court system. And the next 6 months of my life was helping that receiver understand what was going on in the business, what was done correctly or incorrectly. And, the good thing is that most of the companies were doing everything on the up and up. There was a question about how they were handling some of the sales and progression on that side. And, there probably was some shady stuff that was going on that, I didn't have full visibility to. But, at that time, I remember going back to my house and being like, Dad, what just happened to me? I was riding high and all of a sudden, it felt like the world was crashing down. I'd never really been in that situation that, you had SWAT agents dropping out of the ceiling about how they were going to do it. So that was one of those real up and down moments for sure.
That's wild. So what did the next days look like for you? Were you like out of a job? What happened?
Actually, the receiver, he came on pretty quickly and, he utilized me as a resource and found out pretty quickly that I didn't really know anything about what he was investigating on the other side. But I was also a great resource for him for running the business, for understanding the different nuances of it, for producing financial aspects of what was real and what wasn't. And the financial aspect of it was all on the up and up. It was just the sales methodology they were using that they were questioning. So he utilized me for about 6, 8 months. And during that time, he actually helped me find my first tech job. He recommended me to the next tech job. And that's how I kind of got into this tech space for that gentleman alongside the CPA found me 2 or 3 things. So I went from a CFO group to this was my business to kind of operating in a hybrid CFO group of my own for a little bit, right? Where I had 2 or 3 clients that I'd been introduced to and, one mainstay. So it's proverbial making lemonade out of lemons story that came from that one.
That's such a strong lesson in when things are getting tough, you're not sure what's happening, to just remain calm, be patient, and let things work out. Because most of the time they do. And we actually had someone on the podcast that took a company public, grew it to like 300 million or something in revenue in a very short amount of time. It was like a year or so. And then his CEO and I think one other C-suite got sent to jail. They got indicted for a white collar crime, not to go down the rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
it had to do with their sales. Like a fentanyl product that they were selling for like cancer patients to, help them get pain relief fast. And I guess the way they're going about the sales, it was similar. It was a similar time to the opioid crisis, and they weren't going about sales the right way, which it's not the right thing to do from a legal, from a moral standpoint. You just have to approach people from a human element.
It's an unfortunate thing that, I mean, our world is based more on the financial impact, more so than ever before, right? And it's a tough balance to have when you're trying to do something the right way, but you have all of these monetary, financial, fiscal obligations put on you. I mean, we see it every day. The stock market, and again, not to go down a rabbit hole, but you see the stock market moving a percent, 2% in any given day, and that's crazy. If you look even 15 years ago, it was rare that that was happening. Things were moving. A big day was 0.2% in a movement in the market. And now it's, a percent to 2% a day that's happening. That's a lot of swing and a lot of pressure put on, these people that are managing these large companies, these large things. And, it makes you really see that you have to manage to the future at the same time that you're managing everything in the here and now, because the future and the prognostication of that is just as important as what's happening right this second.
Yeah, to say, going down a rabbit hole, like I could go so many different paths on this trading and
Yeah.
reporting, them changing quarterly to like twice a year and some of these other reasons why the movement is happening so much. But I want to learn, well, you had another growth under pressure moment.
Yeah, I would say that we're still kind of in it right now, right? Here in Airspace Link. It was 10 years ago or so where Bezos from Amazon came on and was talking about how drones were going to change the world. And he was talking about a 2 to 3 year horizon. Well, we're talking a decade later and the regulation still has not caught up with the technology yet. And, you know, for our business, it's wonderful that we have a reputation for building this idea. And, we have a concept that I still think is very unique in the marketplace. Most software providers or, companies in the UAS space are talking about how they help operators. We're talking about how we enable government. And, eventually how do we become a revenue generating line item for them, not just a cost line item for them by utilizing that same infrastructure to enable commercial delivery. But, the revenue has been slower coming than the sentiment. We get technical validation on everybody we talk to. We're getting to sit alongside the biggest gorillas in the industry up at conferences, and people are looking to us to comment on these regulations. And there's a lot of times when you're in a growth startup, the tech validation or the market sentiment is there's a gulf between that and the revenues that have generated. But usually it gets smaller over the course of time and it's not so wide. Here at Airspace Link, I would tell you, because of the size and breadth of this opportunity and how much this could transform the world, that gap has been wider. And for someone like me, that's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of processing power to make sure that the two line up eventually, where all of this momentum that we have, matches the revenues at some point. And I think we're closer than ever before. But this has been a few year stretch for me here at Airspace Link, where that has, the path has been more or less clear at any given point, and you're trying to navigate. I've always said that our CEO has done a great job of painting the big vision. If you're looking at a map, he's shown us how, we're starting here in New York and we're trying to get to LA, and LA is the goal. I think we've found a way to navigate how do we get out of the state of New York, and we're starting to travel across the Midwest. But instead of knowing that there's a path directly across from New York to LA, there's a lot of side avenues and side streets that we have to take to get there. But eventually we're going to get on the highway and it's going to take us real fast over to that side. And, that's what we've been preparing for and what we're very excited about. But that's a growth under pressure moment, not just for myself and how I handle it, for my CEO and how he handles it, or the founders and how they handle it, but also for the entire team that's been with us for, various times of, 2 to 6 years to be able to hit the inflection point for the organization.
Yeah, the startup world is number one, it's a dog eat dog. You gotta be able to stay in the fight and timing is really important because you could join in a startup and like most of these AI startups that get a multi-billion dollar valuation within a year or 6 months. I'm sure you've seen some of them that are absolutely absurd. Runway is a super important part of the growth phase in a startup. You're going from, hey, we raise funds and we have 12 to 18 months of runway. But if things are not moving in the right direction, whether that's market, politics, legal, there's a whole landscape that you have to be understanding of. You got to extend the runway and you got to raise more. And it's all strategy from a financial and operational perspective. So you got a lot on your shoulders.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we raised at our Series B at the end of or the middle of 2022, which is right as that market was starting to soften. And you raise a good round, and in typical VC fashion, you're raising it for 18 to 30 months, right? They want you to have enough money to feel comfortable moving forward and moving quickly, but also not so much money that you kind of get complacent and you're yeah you don't feel like your back's against the wall. We raised at a time where there was still a lot of immaturity in the industry and a lot of different paths that it could take. And one of the things that we said at that time was, all right, we really need to not overextend ourselves early so that we can extend this runway as long as we need to have it, right? So we've extended our runway from that Series B further than what we ever imagined because we're trying to line up with the regulation coming out at the same time. And thus you have to say, okay, VC investors always want you to move fast. They always want you to use that
Yeah.
capital to grow. But at the same time, you're having to say, we don't have the exact formula yet. The regulations are so disjointed yet that we can't say we know exactly what's going to happen or we have the exact repeatable sales process yet. Let us hold a little bit back. Let us slow roll this a little bit so that eventually we can get to the point that when we do have the repeatable formula, when we do have the blueprint, we still have a little bit of gas to throw on the fire and move quickly at that point to bridge you to the point where the validation has happened in the larger round or the next round can happen.
Yeah. And the VCs want you to move fast because they want to get an exit. They want to hit their IRR. There's many reasons why, but the startups that are the most successful are the ones that focus on their mission, of course, with some advice from the VCs. And they're partners in the business, but it's important that they stand beside you and say, "Hey, I understand the legislation. I understand what's going on. Let's have a path forward," and not over dilute where you guys are just out at that point where the owners don't have any stake in the company, and then it's like, what are we fighting for?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Adaptability at that point, becomes one of the highest important, traits to have when that's happening, right? Are you able to pivot and, kind of move within that, right? It's not the strategy that has always gotten you to that point, but the ability to morph that strategy or have flexibility in that strategy to hit the next page. It's one of the funnest parts about doing it while at the same time it's the most stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine the shoes that you're in right now. All right, I want to ask you one quick question, and then I want to do a rapid fire. How do you show up for your team during these times of stretching things out and giving them the comfort level that, hey, we are getting here to this end result or to the next chapter? How do you keep them in their seats and lead them?
Again, for me, the parallel came back to sports, right? At the end of a basketball game, I wanted the ball in my hands. Doesn't necessarily mean I needed to take the shot, but I wanted to be, a pivotal part of doing it. And you can't be afraid of that moment. You can't let, a failure that's happened where you missed the last shot, or you can't let the fear of the moment, everybody's eyes on you kind of stop you. And, that's the balance that we try to have with our team here is, provide them the context for why we're doing what we're doing at any given point. And it's hard sometimes because you can't always provide all of that context. Some of it might be something that you don't want to share. Or it might be something that is too squishy to share yet. It might be something that you can't share across everything because they don't have all of the contextual knowledge to be able to do it. But you want to share enough so that they feel comfortable with your decision making and have trust in what you're doing. And I think building that trust with them understanding why you make decisions the way you do. We use a lot of commander's intent philosophy, at least at the companies I've been at, where at the very beginning, I want to understand my my founder so that I can serve them better. 85% of the time, I know what their decision is going to be after 3 to 6 months of being with them. That last 10 to 15% is kind of squishy, and I need to be able to go talk to them about it. I want the people that are reporting to me or the people that are under me to have that same knowledge that they can say, I know what Bill would do in this situation, and I know it, 75 or 80% of the time. And that gives them a comfort level that they're not going to get surprised by, a decision that I make or something off the wall. Sure, are there some times that we're going to have to take a big swing, or we're going to have to do something a little bit different? But I think, trying to enable that predictability for them, and predictability is probably the wrong word, but like trust that, you're going to operate in a fashion that makes sense to them, can make sense to yourself, that they can put it in alignment with past decisions, right? Not decisions can't be made in a vacuum when you're in this. They have to be made in the context of every other decision you've made during the course of this journey.
That's great. That's really great. All right, let's wrap up. I want to just throw 3 rapid fire questions at you. What is one metric you check every single day or week without fail?
Cash flow. Easier, the easiest, the one that in a business like ours that you have to monitor. And when you're trying to align with government regulation, something that can be delayed as much as that, cash flow is the number one. And I know that's a pretty generic answer, but it's the truth.
It's good. We've had many people just say cash, not even cash flow. So cash flow is good. And what about a book or podcast that you'd recommend?
Book or podcast, but it's the 5 personality types. And I think that it really helped us understand our organization and the leadership team, because our leadership team came from our CEO, who had been not really done a software company per se before, but had been very successful in a lot of other businesses that he's ran. And he had, 30% of his team that had come over with it. And we were finding that the leadership team that he had put together, it wasn't always that 1 + 1 = 4 yet. Right. And I think after reading, this book, and what it did is it helped us put ourselves into buckets that we could understand where people's strengths and weaknesses were. And that really put us in the mentality that we could work together. And then at that point, that's where you started to see more and more synergies happening throughout the leadership team in their various functions.
I'm looking it up right now.
God, I just had it too.
It's not the 5 love languages, right?
It, it's basically the 5 love languages, but for business.
Yeah.
And that was the best part about it. 5 working personality types, or
Yeah, I'm showing the 4 agreements, the Enneagram, surrounded by idiots. But you'll have
yeah,
to share it with me afterwards, and we'll share it with our audience. But that's
put it in
great.
the text. I'll have it over to you on the heels of there.
Okay,
I
perfect.
have the book over at my desk right now.
Yeah, I want to know it, and we'll share it in the show notes as well for everyone to follow and check it out, because it obviously sounds like a good one. And that goes back to sports and the team effort, right? And teamwork, and being able to rely on the different strong suits and weaknesses of everyone else. Finish this sentence for me. A leader under pressure should always.
A leader under pressure should always take into account the team first. There are so many times where the leader at an organization like the ones that I'm in, where the founder is so prevalent that they become almost a father figure in a lot of these ways, right? All the decisions roll up to them. They have so much pressure on them, and they have to think about the team first. It's not about themselves. It's not about them being in the spotlight. It's not about them pushing themselves forward. It's about them pushing the idea. And by definition, in my world, them thinking about others first is going to cause everybody to have that feeling that I want to lift this leader up. I want to make them look as good as possible. It accomplishes more for them looking good, them thinking of themselves first.
That's incredible. Bill, thank you so much for your time. This was really insightful, learning both about you, your thought process, Airspace Link, and the future of the drone highway. So really appreciate you joining me today.
This was fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, Eric.
Of course. All right. Till next time. Thanks.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Growth Under Pressure. I'm your host, Eric Josovitz, and I hope today's conversation gave you practical insights you can apply to your own growth journey. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with another founder, operator, or leader who'd find it valuable. We publish new episodes every other Thursday, featuring conversations with people that are building, scaling, and leading under pressure. And let me know in the comments what stood out most from today's episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, keep pushing, keep growing, and I'll see you on the next episode of Growth Under Pressure.